Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Bureaucracy's Digital Challenge. Max Weber is one of the German sociologists. It is he who studied in detail about bureaucracy, and it is because of him the word bureaucracy was popularized. According to the principles as derived by Max Weber, there are few very key principles for bureaucracy. What are these key principles? One, it includes the hierarchical arrangement. What is this hierarchical arrangement? Let's consider a pyramid. This pyramid will have higher authorities, mid-level officers, and you will also have lower level workers as well. So what happens in this particular organization? As per this particular pyramid, there is an organization structure where power flows from the top to the bottom. All the means of communication will flow from the top to the bottom, and these authorities, these lower authorities and the middle level authorities will have a prescribed role and duty which is based on their ranking. So what do we have is an hierarchical structure, which is one of the principles of Max Weber's bureaucracy. Then what we have is political neutrality. What is this political neutrality? We have the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats are selected by the merit-based examination to the government. What should they do? They should be executing the projects of the government of the respective states as well as the country. But in this particular backdrop, they have to be politically neutral. What is political neutrality here? Irrespective of which political party comes and forms the government, they have to view every political party equally. They should not have any political affiliations, they should not have any biasness, and they should not have any partisanship as well. So what we have is political neutrality, which means they will be serving every political party equally without any bias when they form the government. The third principle of Weber's bureaucracy happens to be anonymity. What is this anonymity? When it comes to the organs of the state, what do we have? We have the legislature, we also have the executive, we also have the judiciary. Let's not discuss about the legislature and the judiciary. But when it comes to the executive, we have the political executive, we also have the administrative executive. Who are the political executive? These are the elected representatives. We all vote for them. These people represent us in the parliament as well as in the state legislature. They are elected for a period of 5 years, and every 5 years they enter into the mode of elections. We choose them on the basis of work that they have accomplished over the past few years. That is what is called as political executive, where we elect them. We have an adult franchise. We go to the polling booth, vote for these political executives. Then we have administrative executives. Who are these administrative executives? These are the ones who are not elected, but they are selected on the basis of merit. For example, our own civil services that we have, the IAS officers, the IPS officers, the IFS officers, these are the ones who are selected by a process conducted by one of the institutions in India. When it comes to the anonymity principle, these administrative executives will have to be anonymous. What do we mean by anonymity? That these officers will only have to advise the politicians. Whether it is good or not, whether it is bad or not, will be ultimately decided by the people, but the suggestion will be given by these officers to the political executive, but the credit goes to the political executive. If there is a blame, it goes to the political executive, but this officer, the administrative executive, neither receives praise nor blame publicly. So if something goes wrong, it is the political executive who will take the blame for it. If something goes well, it is the political executive who will take advantage of it, since they are elected periodically by the process of democracy. Anonymity basically means that the civil servants work behind the curtain. They are not in front of the people. They need not have to convince the people. All the convincing part is only left to the political executive. So when we speak about anonymity, it is synonymous to anonymous. What is anonymous here? We do not know who has done what. Let's say there is an article which is written by a person, and this is named as anonymous, which means we do not know who's done it. So when it comes to anonymity, we do not know which civil servant has given that idea. If it goes well, good for the politician. If it does not go well, it is bad for the politician. So the blame as well as praise will only go to the politician, but this will not have any consequences for that particular administrative executive. So one of the important principles of Weberian model of bureaucracy happens to be anonymity. Why are we discussing all this? What is the importance of this discussion? This is where we have to speak about social media. What is social media? We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have YouTube, multiple other social media platforms. Now the question that is being discussed under this article is, should civil servants who as of now remain anonymous have an anonymity principle as per the rules and regulations and conduct rules? Should they be anonymous, that is they should follow the principle of anonymity, or not? Should they expose to the world about their work on the social media platforms or not? There are arguments which says yes, they have to use the social media platforms. There are other set of arguments which also says no, these civil servants should not be making use of this profile or the social media handles for their personal glory. First, let us look at some of the arguments which says that yes, these civil servants will have to connect to the people by making use of the social media. We have number of platforms. Let's say for example Facebook, then we have Twitter. These officers have their social media handles. What is the article saying? This article is currently saying that these people can use the social media handle to give information to the people. Information of what? Information about a particular scheme. Information about what? How is this scheme going to benefit the people? If they're using the social media for information delivery, for addressing the grievances of the people, then let's execute this particular platform where these officers can make use of the social media. Why? The ultimate beneficiary will be the people. So if social media can deliver people the welfare schemes and programs as soon as possible without any lackadaisical approach which usually is associated with red tape, why not make use of social media to ensure that a scheme or a program is ultimately delivered to the people? And at the same time, if people have their grievances that there is no water coming to their houses, basic amenities are not addressed, if they can put it on Twitter, if they can put it on Facebook, and if the official handle of that particular district collector or the representative body is able to do it, why not make use of the social media is the first argument. Then we have Prime Minister Narendra Modi in one of the conferences. He goes on to say that India, we are moving from e-governance to mobile governance. What is this mobile governance? All of us have so much of internet penetration. Thanks to the competition in the mobile connectivity network, thanks to the telecommunication liberalization as well, we all have a phone which also has digital connectivity, which also has speed as well. So at the click of one particular website or an app, we would be able to question the government as well. So what is happening here? We are able to move from the e-governance module to the mobile governance module. So everything literally can be done on the mobile governance, and this is the best mode of delivering welfare to the people of the country. This is a mode of delivering information to the people of the country. So what does Prime Minister Narendra Modi say? Prime Minister Narendra Modi says that this particular tool of mobile governance where we are making use of social media can be used for spreading the information. However, he also gives one particular emphasis to the negative issues as well. What is that? Let's say for example, there is one of a state or one of the regions or one of the villages. The district collector or the officer in charge of polio, what should he do? He should ideally give information where these polio vaccines are being given, what time it will be administered, how many people are required to visit a particular center. All the information will have to be delivered to the people. But this should be done off the social media handle of not the personal account, but it has to be the official handle of the district collector of that particular region. Instead of going by the personal handles where they have their personal information, instead it has to be routed as DC of so and so region, as Tahsildar of so and so region. So the official handle will have to give the information. Why? That is because if the personal handle is given, the very principle of anonymity will be violated, and as a result there has to be a designation. This designation, a social handle, has to be created. This information has to be delivered to the people and awareness has to be created, but this should not be at the cost of personal handle, where it is about the pompous nature of that particular individual, where a photograph is put and ultimately this very principle of anonymity gets violated, says Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has clearly said that social media sites are helpful. They should be able to spread information about the good work being done by the government as well as the district administration as well as by the regional administration. Finally, we also have the opportunity where the bureaucrats would be able to shape the public discourse when it comes to using the social media. One such example that we can speak about is in reference to United Kingdom, where with respect to Brexit they were able to influence the outcome, says this article. So this is one part of the argument, which is that yes, social media will have to be used by the civil servants ultimately to deliver schemes, programs and welfare issues, and at the same time if people have grievances that should be addressed. This is one part of the story. The other part of the story goes on to say no to the use of social media by the civil servants and the bureaucrats. Why? That is because we believe in democracy. Democracy is what? Democracy is where we have the political executives elected, then we also have these administrative executives who have to work behind the curtain. If all the limelight is being taken by the bureaucrats, they should also take the blame as well. But when it comes to this particular issue, most of the people, in case they are handling their personal profiles on the social media, they will only look at accomplishments, they will only showcase the achievements, but they will not take any blame whatsoever. It is in this backdrop the article also says that when it comes to this democracy, there is a principle of anonymity, which is one of the principle of Weberian bureaucracy. So irrespective of whether it is good or not, it is the politician who has to take the blame and the praise. There'll be no bureaucrat who will be using his personal profile to give an achievement status to his own stature, but this should be only by the official handle, where again the anonymity picture comes into picture, and the official handle of that particular institution should take up all the designated roles, says the author. Apart from this, there are examples from the past where you have the IAS and the IPS officers, in fact state level officers as well, who have used the platform of this social media to tarnish the images of their fellow workers, and at the same time they have also violated the rules as prescribed by the conduct rules. So when we speak about the IAS officers or the IPS officers, they have to follow the conduct rules prescribed by the government of India. Therefore, the civil servants should be anonymous. They should follow the principle of anonymity, and ultimately it is the politicians who have to be accountable, is another set of argument. However, even if they are using the social media handles, this should only be in reference to the position of that particular officer, but not at the personal level, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says tackling the Maoists. The article here is speaking about decline of the Maoist activities in India. Back in the 1960s, we had the Naxalism movement, which got originated in Naxalbari in West Bengal. What started as a justice movement against the government, where they were not able to provide the goods and services to the poor people in West Bengal, started spreading to multiple other states in India. It is also called as the Red Corridor as well. So Naxalism as a concept initially started because there were these governance issues which are prevalent in a particular region. There were poor people who were not able to get welfare schemes and programs. So an armed rebellion was taken against the state. Why? Because they wanted these services in that particular region. So this started in 1960s. It spread in multiple states as well. However, because of the continuous activities of the government, because of the welfare schemes and programs, because of the offensive strategies introduced by the government of India, today what we have is the geographical influence of the Maoists has reduced from 96 districts in 10 states in 2010 to 41 now in 2021, says the Home Minister of India. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand how is that we were able to reduce the impact and the movement of Naxalism. When we speak about why Naxal activities are declining, dropping over a period of time, we have to look at from two perspectives. One is the welfare perspective, the other is the offensive strategy perspective. What is the welfare perspective? As we initially discussed, there are multiple districts in India, multiple villages in India where they did not have multiple schemes of the government of India going and reaching them. What would happen? Because people were not happy with it, they did not get the required infrastructure, they were not able to see what was happening and what was being delivered to them. They had to take up arms against the established government. Why? Because they felt that the government was not giving justice to them, which is why they took up arms against the government. Initially as well, when the Naxalism movement started, it was only seen as a law and order problem. That is when the government realized that we can put this off the idea of Naxalism only by the military activities or by the police action. So what would happen? The government only went offensive in the initial purpose. But over a period of time, it also realized that in spite of the schemes, measures, welfare programs that was taken up, this was ultimately not delivered to the people in that region. So maximum reforms were conducted, there were revamps that were conducted, people were allowed to change a region in that particular village, and as a result, over a period of time, what we have seen is a massive shift when it comes to reforms in those regions, especially the poor society, especially the tribal society, where they did not see welfare schemes and programs. So the government with the welfare approach was able to reduce the impact of Naxalism. So what did the government do? The government came up with initiatives of transforming a particular region, provided employment opportunities, electrified those villages. Initially, number of villages and remote corners of the country were not electrified. They did not have power supply as well. So the government of India, the government of respective states provided electrification to the villages. Education was becoming a fortune for very less number of people in the rural fold as well as in the remote corners. So education, establishment of schools, opportunities, in fact subsidies and also scholarships were being given to number of people as well. Added to this, health centers were provided in these regions, and all weather connectivity, roads and infrastructure was also provided. In fact, when it comes to infrastructure, of late telecommunication infrastructure also becomes important. So the government started focusing holistically about the welfare of these people as well as the tribal fold. So on one side, what the government was able to come up with is welfare schemes and programs, because of which the number of people who took up arms against the establishment over a period of time dropped their arms because they were able to get the welfare schemes and programs. Added to this, the government also took up offensive strategy or the counter insurgency method as well, where they were asked to give up their arms. If they were not able to give up their arms, ultimately there were people who were immediately neutralized as well. So the government, making use of the welfare approach and the offensive approach, was able to get people out of poverty, and ultimately what we see is Naxalism, the very principle of fighting against the state, has been reduced over a period of time. Added to this, when it comes to the Maoism or this principle of Naxalism has become unpopular among the tribals and the rural poor. Why? That is because most of these tribal people initially were apprehensive that the government would not do anything for them. It is this loophole which led the Naxalites to open up to take up arms against the government. Initially, this was the plan, but over a period of time, they also realized that this whole idea of Naxalism was only for their own selfish purposes but not for the people. So what was happening over a period of time? The decline of Naxalite movement was losing its basis. Why? Because there were more welfare schemes and programs. When there was an attack by the state against the Naxalites, these tribal people were used as the shield in case these tribal people went up and exercised into the modes of democracy. They were killed as well. So the tribals realized that they wanted welfare schemes and programs. They wanted to enjoy the fruits of democracy, but that was not allowed by those people who were running the shows of Naxalism. So what was happening here? They understood that this piece of Naxalism is only for the selfish breed of people wanting to take advantage in the name of poverty and tribal activism. Added to this, we saw that there were people from Naxalism who were getting funding from the anti national forces and also from the anti social forces as well. What are anti national forces? It can be the state and the non state actors from some other country funding this particular Naxalism movement. So people were not happy with it. People did not want to go against the government. People did not want to go against India. Their only objective was that they get the welfare schemes and programs but not to go against India. So they understood that there are few anti-national forces in picture who are funding the Naxalism movement, which is why they realized that this Naxalism is not good for the country. Added to this, there were anti-social elements as well. These are the people who conduct criminal activities. These are the ones who conduct crime activities as well. They do not respect the rule of law as well. They conducted illegal activities. They engaged themselves in extortion activities. In fact, the lands which were meant for the poor and the tribal, mining activities were also taking up, and the fortunes that they generated were not transferred to the poor and the tribal people. In fact, it was used for the selfish outcome of these Naxalite movements. All this meant that people realized the truth of Naxalism, that Naxalism or the so-called principles of Maoism was not doing something good for them, but instead it was actually cutting down on their dreams. So people started moving away from the very idea of Naxalism. In spite of this activity decreasing over a period of time, there are some pockets in West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Telangana where these Maoists continue to haunt the security operations. This is why this article goes on to say that there has to be more increase of welfare schemes and programs, and there are few tribal people and the poor people who are connected to the Naxalites, and they also have their own bases set up as well. They also have a huge following as well. These people should be made aware of the ill effects of Naxalism, and ultimately they should be used as influencers to turn the thought process and ultimately create the awareness about the schemes and programs envisioned by the government of India as well as the state government. So we already have number of schemes and programs. These schemes and programs will have to be enhanced and awareness will have to be created. There will be influencers in that particular region. Their thought process will have to be captured so that they can ultimately influence large number of people. Finally, if they are not ready to put guns, they should be neutralized, and if they are ready to put down their guns, amnesty scheme and programs will also have to be initiated by the government of India and the respective state governments. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says how to grease the wheels of justice. The article here is speaking about pendency of cases in the judicial system in India and how we can overcome this particular issue so that justice can ultimately be delivered to the citizens in the country. The article starts off by giving some of the statistics with respect to the pendency in our country. More than 40% of the cases are decided after 3 years in India, while in many other countries, less than 1% of the cases are decided after 3 years. What does this mean? That this means that more than 40% of the cases are only resolved. The judgment is passed after 3 years, but you compare the same, juxtapose it to other countries, only about 1% of the cases in most of the advanced countries, it takes more than 3 years. Such is the pathetic condition that we have when it comes to the judicial system in India, where we have large number of cases that have piled up in the Indian judiciary. Now the question is, what are the concerns when it comes to the judicial process? When it comes to the judicial process, we have the rich. The rich would be able to hire the best advocates in the country. We also have the powerful muscle people as well. These are the ones who are the goons. They also have access to the money as well, and they would also be able to get adjournments after adjournments. Then you also have all types of wrongdoers who are rich, the powerful, and also have political bureaucratic nexus. Such people are also engaged in all types of wrongdoing, but the victim of these crimes are not provided the justice. Why? Because of the long delay when it comes to the execution and passing of the judgment. As the common saying goes, justice delayed is justice denied. What if a particular judgment is passed after years where that person is not able to enjoy the fruits of his own hard work? In this particular backdrop, the article goes on to say that we have a sluggish justice delivery system where it is the poor and the marginalized who are suffering, and it also speaks about the criminal justice system where it says that most of the prisoners in Indian prisons are under trials. Who are these under trials? These are the ones who are not convicted by the court of law. What do we mean by it? When a person commits a crime, it has to be proved in the court of law whether the accused has actually committed the crime or not. But then in India, most of them are under trials, which means the court has not passed the judgment, but it is in the process of passing the judgment and they are serving the jail term without even being convicted. So when it comes to the criminal justice system in India, most of them are under trials, which means out of this, the poor and the marginalized are the most hit. That is why the article goes on to say that there are two important parameters that we have to focus on. If we have to revamp the judicial system, if we have to deliver justice to the poor and the marginalized, there are two important options that the government, the Supreme Court, and the whole of judiciary will have to do. What is that? One is we fill in the vacancies that are in existence. This is where we have to understand that the sanctioned judicial positions which are actually vacant in the country will have to be fulfilled as soon as possible, where the Chief Justice of India, the Chief Justice of the relevant High Court, the state governments at the district level along with the High Court will have to ensure that all the sanctioned positions, the vacancies are fulfilled as soon as possible. The author also puts the onus and the responsibility on the judiciary to bring about the reforms in this particular process. Why? Because as of now, the collegium system seems not so transparent. So the judiciary in itself will have to revamp itself, will have to be accountable to the people, and at the same time, filling judicial vacancies should also be considered the top priority, says the author. Added to this, the second option given by the author is use of technology. What is it? We have the E-Committee of the Supreme Court. According to the E-Committee of the Supreme Court, which came into existence in the year 2005, it has given some important developments and principles which needs to be followed. What are those? One, if we are making use of the technology, there has to be a development of algorithm. This development of algorithm has to be automatic, where there is a development of a program and algorithm where the computer on its own is able to decide on the case listing, the case allocation, as well as the adjournments. As of now, there are people of influence, in case they are able to hire very good reputed advocates who have name and fame in the Supreme Court and in the High Court, are able to get their cases listed even at the cost of people who've already filed one. So case listing, case allocation, and adjournments are happening not on the basis of first come first serve, but instead it is happening on the basis of reputation, happening on the basis of how rich the litigant is. So this should be rooted out, and the first come first serve basis is what needs to be taken into picture, says this article. As of now, if there is a petitioner who's filed a case in the court of law, if he has to pay the court fees, this is not available on the online platforms. So what happens? He has to physically travel to the courts. If he cannot travel, he has to give it to the advocate as well. So the advocate at times may also charge exorbitant prices as well. So what do we have is payment of fees issues. So this should also be made online, says the author. And finally, as of now, because of COVID-19, what we are having is the virtual hearings. Even after COVID-19, what we should develop is a hybrid model, says the author. What is this hybrid model? To make sure that all these pendency of the cases are done away with as soon as possible, we have to continue with the virtual hearing, and at the same time, offline physical presence will also have to be initiated. So with COVID-19 off, what we will have is the offline physical capacity meetings, and continued with this, we need to have the virtual presence of the court of law, says this article. Therefore, in order to reduce the pendency of the cases, make access to the justice easier for the litigants, reduce the cost, give opportunity for the lawyers from small towns, what we require is these measures to be taken, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says in pursuit of happiness. We have the World Happiness Report. This World Happiness Report is issued by United Nations Sustainable Developmental Solutions Network. What is it based on? It is based on 6 parameters. What are these 6 parameters? Levels of GDP, life expectancy, generosity, social support, freedom and corruption in that country. So this World Happiness Report will consider all these 6 parameters. It will ask questionnaires to people in that particular country, and it will also give a scale and a rating. If a person is not happy with the country, he can give 0 to it, and if a person is happy with the country, he can also give a rating of 10 as well. So what would happen? There would be a rating. So if there is a country which has good GDP numbers, people are happy, they would rate it as 10. So 10 means it is very good, and if it is 0, it means that the country is not doing good on all these parameters. Why are we discussing this? That is because this World Happiness Report came into picture in the year 2012. Up until then, many countries had not taken into picture the happiness as part of policy making. They did not consider that happiness is very important for the governance as well. But of late, what we realize is that happiness is also part of the policy making, says this article. This is where the author goes on to say the World Happiness Report of 2021 ranks India 139 out of the 149 countries. India has performed very badly, says the author. When it comes to the 2021, the primary focus of the country, how well it has performed, was with special emphasis to the COVID-19. So what happened during this period? Were people happy during the COVID-19? Did they lose their jobs? How was their family contribution? How was their family able to react? How is the employment situation in the house? How are they able to cope up with the COVID-19? Are they able to go out and speak up to the people? Multiple questions were asked with respect to the COVID-19 and how it had the impact at their personal level. So taking this into picture, India has got 139 out of 149 countries, which means that out of all the samples that were corrected, people were not happy relatively, says this article. Why is that Indian people were not happy when you consider the happiness report? That is because according to the author, it was not part of the public policy in India, which is why people were not happy, which is why the institutions which were supposed to deliver have not delivered, which is why the justice which was supposed to have been delivered, the welfare schemes and programs that were supposed to be delivered have not delivered. So people were not happy, says this article. According to the World Justice Report, as many as 40% of the people live outside the protection of law in the world. More than 5 billion people fall into this justice gap. In fact, India's rule of law rank was 69 as per the World Justice Report of 2021, says this article. Now the question is, who publishes this World Justice Report? Please look into it and put it on the comment section. Now if we have to link the rule of law rank and the World Happiness Report, you can break them into two parts. One is what is called as the positive role of the state. The other is the negative role of the state. What is the positive role of the state? When it comes to the positive role of the state, there are institutions, there are also departments, there are also people, there is also administrative machinery as well. Are they able to provide welfare schemes and programs to the people? Yes, the government of India has come up with multiple schemes and programs, but is it meeting the intended beneficiary is the first question. So what is the positive obligation here? The positive obligation for the government in this particular case is that there is a welfare scheme and program initiated by the government of India, initiated by the respective state governments, but this program, has it reached that particular person? So the government of India may have taken pride. The government of respective states may have taken pride in coming up with a scheme, but has it met that person? Did it reach that person in the present situation? Since we have not calculated it, maybe people are not happy about the welfare schemes and programs is the positive connotation. Then we have to look at the negative role of the state. What does this mean? This means that the state will have to prevent the crimes from occurring. This means that there is increasing cases of rape, murder, law and order issue, political instability, then there is vigilantism, then there are people going against the minorities, then there are issues against the CSTs. All of this means that there is a negative obligation on the state as well, where it has to prevent something from occurring. It has to ensure that these type of ill effects on the society does not happen. Even here it has failed, says the author. If we have to consider happiness, most of the developed countries, where they are rich countries, if they have failed on the law and order front, happiness was not delivered to its citizens, says this article. So what is that we are looking at? We are looking at the negative obligation, which means it has to prevent the law and order issue, it has to prevent rape, murder, so on and so forth. Even in the advanced developed countries, if they are not able to fulfill this criteria, people are not happy in that region. So in India, there are people who are not happy. There are no positive outcomes, leading to distributive justice getting violated, and at the same time there is legitimate grievances which has to be taken into picture by the institutions, the police officers, the justice delivery system, that has also failed. As a result, India has got a ranking of 69 in the World Justice Report of 2021, says this article. In order to overcome this particular issue, what needs to be done? We have number of examples world over. We have United Arab Emirates, which has come up with the Ministry of Happiness. This happens to be the first country to set up such a ministry. We have had some in the state governments in India as well, but at the national level, we need something like this, says the author. Added to this, we have Bhutan, which had also introduced gross national happiness. India should also come up with such ministries and programs. It has to monitor the impact of the policies, check the happiness meter over a period of time, and ensure that a better life is given to the people in the country. So greater the number of people happy in India, greater will be the outcome of the government program, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Should civil servants shed the principle of anonymity and engage actively on social media? Critically examine. The past few years have seen a consistent decline in Naxalite activities, but their potency in select areas has not reduced. Discuss the way forward. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. You can also upload the image on our website as well. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.